we have with us tonight our distinguished guest, Professor Pappe, who was born in Haifa. He got his PhD at Oxford University. He taught at Haifa University, at first at the history department, then in the Department of Political Science. And then in 2006, he moved to Great Britain, to Exeter University, where he's a director of the European Centre for Palestine Studies and a co-director of the Exeter Centre for Ethnopolitical Studies.
Excellent.
Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm an historian and I'm an academic, and I'm very much aware of my role as an individual when I talk about solutions. I think we have to be modest as individuals. We cannot believe that we have a solution and all the rest of the people do not have a solution, or that we have worked out a solution to such details that we know exactly how tomorrow to go about it. I think the role of intellectuals, of people who are academics and scholars, is to widen the scope of the debate rather than to make dramatic statements or sound bites, what they support or they don't support, because they are not better than anyone else in either predicting the future or in having great ideas about how to solve complex situation as we have on the ground on Israel and Palestine. But because I'm an historian, and I'm particularly interested in the history of the Zionist movement and the Zionist ideology and the Zionist strategy, because that's my particular interest, more than anything else, although I've written on the Palestinian national movement, on Palestinian history, but my main interest is to understand the place I come from, because I was born in Israel and I was part of that system. Because of my reading of Zionist history, my first conclusion is that as far as the Zionist movement is concerned, or as far as most of the political forces in Israel today are concerned, but that is also true about the past, there will never be a two-state solution. So it's not, for me, it's not just a matter of whether I like the idea of one state and I prefer it to two states. I will get to this as well. I don't want to evade my own opinion on this. But my main point is that the Zionist movement, in the center of the Zionist movement, the strategy was always to have as much of Palestine as possible with as few Palestinians in it as possible. Now, when at a certain stage the Zionist movement invented the idea of the two-state solution, it wanted to create the impression that it does not want the whole of Palestine and does not mind if in small part of Palestine some Palestinians remain. And in that particular small part, if they want to call it a state, at least mainstream Zionism said, we can tolerate it. So what I will share with you this afternoon and early evening is the history that brings me to such a conclusion. And I will end by saying, how do I think we can proceed from here? Which is less important, I think, because as I said, I'm not a political leader, I'm not a prime minister, and I don't have a political party. I just have my own views. The Zionist movement began not far away from here, in the late 19th century. It was motivated by two impulses, which were quite understandable, and I think in many ways even respectable. One was a sense of certain Jews that Europe was not secure. They felt that anti-Semitism could be worse, could be institutionalized. I wouldn't say that they prophesied the Holocaust, but they felt that the ground was burning in many ways, and they needed to move ahead, or move away, rather. The second impulse, which began even earlier than Zionism, but Zionism captured that impulse, was the wish, like so many other religious groups and nations around Europe in the mid-19th century to reinvent yourself as a national movement. You were feeling that your religious identity did not really fit the way you lived, because more and more Jews ceased to be religious. So they asked themselves, what does it mean to be a Jew? And this idea to reinvent Judaism as a national movement fitted well with the first impulse. I'm not secure here, and I'm a nation, so I need a homeland. And as you probably know, they were looking for several options, not Palestine alone, right? I mean, the most famous one was Uganda in Africa, but they were looking for Argentina, Azerbaijan, even a very nice, that's the one I liked, I'm sorry they didn't take it. There was a very nice island north of Buffalo in the United States, near the Niagara Falls. Nobody lived there, they would not have to dispossess anyone. It would have been wonderful if Israel was there. A bit cold, I must admit, but otherwise quite pleasant. But they did choose Palestine, also for reasonable motives. The connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel is obvious. The Bible was an important book. So it was not surprising that Palestine was one of the places that they had in mind. It is also not surprising that the fact that someone else was living in Palestine did not bother them, because Zionism appeared in the end of the colonialist period. And colonialist movements did not really bother much about the fact who lived in areas they wanted to colonize. Right? Think about Latin America, think about North America, think about Australia, Africa, Algeria. It never stopped colonization, the fact that someone else was there. And I think Zionism was a bit different and was much more like the white settlers who came to Australia and North America, because they did not only want to colonize in the name of a mother country, they wanted to colonize and reinvent themselves as a new nation. So they were, I don't buy this myth that says that the Zionists did not know that there were Palestinians in Palestine. They knew. They knew that there were Palestinians in Palestine. But what they said is that their project of recreating a Jewish people again on the ancient land of Israel was far more modern, far more progressive, far more important than the aspirations of the local people. And those of them who were really modernizationists said it would even benefit the local people if we succeed. It would be for their own benefit. This was the early Zionists. The problem started when, just before the First World War, a group of people came from Eastern Europe, more than Central Europe, with different ideas about the native people. And this group, which we call in Israel the second wave of immigration, Aliyah Shniya, is like the Mayflower of Zionism. You know, it's the core group from which the state of Israel really sprang. And that core group did have a different idea. When you read their diaries, when you read their journals, when you read their letters, you see that they looked at the Palestinians as foreigners who took over something that does not belong to them. They were not just a nuisance for being there, they were aggressive people who took over something that belonged to the Zionists. And this particular group, from very early on, was determined that if you wanted to succeed in creating a Jewish state in Palestine, you have to get rid of the Palestinians. Now, they couldn't do it in 1914. They were 10% of the population. They were very poor. They had no military force. The Ottoman Empire was not very supportive of the Zionist project. It changed when the British took over after the First World War. The British Empire, through the Balfour Declaration, said we recognize the right of the Jews for a national homeland in Palestine. Although one should say the British did not think that that should have involved the expulsion of the Palestinians. But they did allow the Zionist movement to build the military power that prepared them for the moment, for the opportunity that came in 1948 to implement this dream of making Palestine a Jewish space or a Jewish place. And when the British decided to leave, the Zionist leadership decided that it had a rare historical opportunity. I think they wanted to expel everyone, and they did quite a good job, one could talk about it this way, within the space that became the Jewish state, which is 80% of historical Palestine. That is Israel today, without the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Lived 1 million, 0.1 maybe, Palestinians. Almost 800,000 out of that million were expelled. So within 80% of Palestine, they created a Jewish state which was almost empty from the native people who lived there before the Palestinians. They did not occupy the West Bank, they did not occupy the Gaza Strip. As you probably remember, the West Bank went to Jordan, the Gaza Strip went to Egypt. But in the rest of the land of Palestine, the Jewish state took over. But they did not expel everyone, as you know. This is why we have today what we call in Israel the Arab minority in Israel, or as they call themselves the Palestinian minority, or as the Palestinians call them, the Arabs of 1948. Call them what you call them, they are there. And they are today 20% of the population. Now, in many ways, historically, you would have said that there were three-state solutions before June 67. Jordan was occupying the West Bank, or annexing the West Bank. Egypt had a military rule over the Gaza Strip, and the rest was the state of Israel. So you had Palestine divided into three, I don't know, states, but three sections, right? Now, 1967 provided a new opportunity for Israel. I won't go, that's a different lecture, why the war of 1967 erupted. I have my own ideas about it, but that's another lecture. But at least we can all agree, whatever we think of why the war started, we can agree that after 6 days of fighting, Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. At least this is not a contentious historical fact, right? Israel became greater Israel after the war. So after kicking out almost 1 million Palestinians in 1948, Israel suddenly takes in another 1.5 million Palestinians. And that's a big problem. If you worked so hard to make sure that you have as much of the land as possible, with as few Palestinians in it as possible, what do you do in 67? Where you have the whole of the land, which is good from a Zionist perspective, but you lose the demographic majority that you have. And I think this is when the current two-state solution was born, not the old one. The old one belongs to the United Nations in 1947, when it tries to offer what it sees like a reasonable idea. Half of Palestine would go to the Jews, half of Palestine would go to the Palestinians. We go in, I'm not going into it, it's another lecture, what happened in the partition resolution. I can't cover everything in 35 minutes. But it doesn't matter. I don't think there's any relevance to the 47 partition resolution. 67 brings to life, brings birth, if you want, to a new idea of a two-state solution that is born in the Israeli left, of one could call it, the Israeli Zionist left. But I don't think it was really about two states. It was about how to, I don't know if there's such an expression in Czech, because you have such good cakes. Probably this is not a good expression in Czech, but in English you say you cannot have the cake and eat it, right? Or I may probably got it wrong also in English. Never mind. But you can't have both. There you are, exactly. I couldn't have put it better. You're absolutely right. And I think the problem was that you had the land that you wanted, but you didn't have the people in the land that you wanted, right? And what the Israeli government decided in 1967 is very relevant to the idea of one state or two states. They could not do in 67 what they did in 1948. In 67, they could not expel the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as they did in 1948. So they had to accept that the people in the West Bank, quite a lot of them, and even more so in the Gaza Strip, were refugees from 1948, would now stay where they are. So the solution they used in 48 was not relevant for 67. Okay. So there was, one problem was solved. We are not going to expel the Palestinians, although I know some of you would say, those of you who know the history well, that quite a few Palestinians were expelled after 67, that is true, but it was not the massive expulsion of 1948. The vast majority of people who lived in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were not removed. The second question was, do we give the territories back to Jordan or Egypt? That was another option. So you don't have to even bother with the question, do we expel or we don't expel? And the Israeli government in 1967 said, no way. For all kinds of reasons. We will never give up the West Bank. I don't want to offend anyone from Gaza, but even at that time, they were not sure they wanted the Gaza Strip. The Egyptians didn't want the Gaza Strip. The Israelis didn't want the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip was a problem for them. But the West Bank, they knew that they wanted to be part of Israel. For religious reasons, because they really believed, or national reasons, not even religious, national reasons. They really believed that the heart of ancient Israel was not in Israel, it was in the West Bank. The cities which are mentioned in the Bible, the whole narrative of who the Hebrew people are, geographically takes place in the West Bank, not in what Israel was before 67. But there was also strategic consideration. You probably are familiar. Abba Eban, who was the diplomat #1 of Israel, used to say, to call the borders of the West Bank the Auschwitz borders, sort of indicating that if Israel goes back to the 67 borders, it would be in a danger of annihilation. And they developed this bizarre idea that the Jordan River is a natural barrier that would stop attacks of Israel. Now, I don't know if you've seen the Jordan River. Even if you are 95 years old and you don't walk that much, you can cross the river with one jump. To think that the River Jordan is a natural barrier, you have to have the imagination of J.K. Rowling's, and you can write a Harry Potter book. But you go to America, and the very serious generals would explain to you how the Jordan River protects Israel. Of course, they've never seen the Jordan River. They think about, what's the name of your lovely river? Latava. They think about something like that. Of course, in today's weaponry, even that is not that important. But even if you go back a little bit, for conventional armies, to cross the River Jordan, all you needed was a good donkey and nothing else. But it convinced a lot of Israelis, without the Jordan River, we are exposed. There will be an invasion from Iraq and Jordan. They will destroy us. Thank God we have this little toilet called Jordan River. It will stop the armies coming. So the second decision was, one was not to expel. The second was, Israel cannot exist without some control over the West Bank. Again, I'm not saying it's the same true about Gaza, but the West Bank looked like an independent. And then came the third question. If we do not expel the people, and we are not giving back the West Bank to anyone, what will happen to the people of the West Bank? So one very liberal minister said, let's give them citizenship. You know, we did the same in Israel. We had 150,000 Palestinians when we created the Jewish state, and eventually, after a military rule, we gave them full citizenship. Let's give citizenship to the people of Nablus, of Halil, of Jerusalem. And of course, he was immediately silenced. He said, are you crazy? There are 1.5 million. There were 1.5 million. 67, there will be 3 or 4 million. You will not have a Jewish state. Because you know, the idea of Israel of democracy is that democracy is fine as long as there is a Jewish majority. When there's no Jewish majority, there cannot be a democracy. You cannot trust the Arabs to be part of a democracy. So Jewish democracy and Jewish demography goes together. And if you give equal rights to the people of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians inside Israel, you are in danger of losing your demographic majority. So this was totally ruled out. So the question still remains, what do you do with the people? And this is when the two-state solution came about.